So, I feel all right, I'm old, I'm tired, I'm probably not going to be fine at any of this stuff, but we should be fighting back a bit more. And we shouldn't give excuses, not even to Mark Sawatko and Bob Crow, frankly. I mean, they're the best of the bad lot, but,
David?
Yeah, I wanted to raise this issue about Hollande and the situation in France, because I think it may make a difference. I mean, if the Socialist Party wins, they're going to win. And they do try to renegotiate the European Treaty. They try and bring in this growth amendment, which is also happening in other countries as well, where Social Democratic parties are really of putting growth amendments in. I just want people to think about the impact that's going to have on sectors in the mass movement. I think there could be a link between, for example, the forces around Mélenchon, PCF, the big mobilisations, the meetings and that, and those sorts of proposals in government. So, although it's okay to talk about transitional demands, we're a long way from really being able to put forward, I think, a lot of weight on clear-cut transitional demands at this stage because of the state of the movement. So therefore, we talk about demands that link in to or lead to being able to raise transitional demands. Obviously, we can talk about transitional demands to the vanguard of the vanguard, but in terms of mass campaigns, I think we've got to look for ways of linking up with, including Keynesian critiques of the present situation. I think things like Will Hutton writing in the Observer, I think some of his arguments can be used by the left in mobilising people, because they're very cogent arguments. Obviously, they don't challenge capitalism, but although you could argue if some of those things were implemented, they're not compatible with, it's like Mélenchon's arguments. Even Hollande's tax proposals for 75% tax, they're not really compatible long term, I think, with the neoliberal situation or even capitalism. Therefore, there's trying to find the links between those sorts of changes that could be taking place. So I'm not quite as pessimistic, I think, as some people. I think there are possibilities of some movement in the situation, but we don't know, as people say. I think there could be some developments that are linked into these shifts, because I think it is a problem for Merkel if Hollande or other governments come into power that don't toe the neoliberal line. I think that could be a problem. That provides some openings, some possible renewed confidence in their class for actually challenging things. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, I just was following some of the interviews on French TV where the workers talking about voting Hollande were saying they were voting Hollande, but they weren't necessarily supporting him politically in terms of his political programme, that thought that was better in terms of mobilising them. That was just ordinary people responding to interviews. I don't think it's quite as... although Marine Le Pen did very well, I don't think we should get carried away too much. I mean, the actual vote she scored was an increase on the previous time, but it's still within the bounds of those votes before. And the votes that Mélenchon got does represent a real something. It's not just the usual vote from before.
I suppose, nobody's thrown their hand up in the air, so I propose that the tree come back now, yeah? And yes, it's gone 9 o'clock, so reverse order, or whichever.
Reverse is fine.
Reverse is fine, yes.
Nobody's said anything, so I can. Just all broad. Okay.
Can I say anything?
Just a broad statement, and I just wanted to raise just one point that I didn't have a chance to, and which relates to the question of why they're doing this, and we just need to keep in mind quickly that in a capitalist economy, profits are the raison d'etre of the system. Now, when investment occurs, it's profits upon investment which investors are concerned. When a business produces a good, it's the return on the cost. Now, given a historically determined subsistence wage, because there is a social subsistence wage, that is an accepted thing that everyone in society can do it. Profits are earned upon goods sold over price of the cost of production. And in many senses, wages have depended on two things. They have this historical social subsistence levels that depend on subsistence and reproduction and societal agreement. And they depend on the level of class struggle. Now, what they're doing and what we're seeing is a working class with high levels of unemployment and low levels of trade union organization and limited political power means that the wage will be close to or at historical social subsistence as the power balance lies with the employers. I'm basically repeating Adam Smith at this point. Now, this means that capitalists can appropriate all or almost all of the surplus revenues earned on goods as profits. A strong working class with powerful trade unions and political might can demand a portion of the increased revenues. And that was the case in the post-war period. Okay, economic growth and that. So, in the absence of economic growth, profits come from wage squeeze, decrease the cost of production of wage goods, and cheapen the value of labor power and increase exploitation. So, we're seeing a deliberate squeeze of wages and incomes for the poor. They're undermining historical social subsistence, and this is what's happening. So what happens when we squeeze wages? It means that people can't buy their darn goods. Okay? And in the, this is why Keynes spent so much talking about the question of effective demand and manipulating it. So, because the working class can't cover all the realization of goods. They can't. But it can sustain effective demand to a certain level where at least the system could run. It will, So Keynes' whole point was to try to reduce the crises. What these people are doing is they're literally pushing us towards a realization crisis. People need more explanation of that. I'll do it another time.
Or in the pub.
Or in the pub, yeah, which is more probable. Anyway, so
Right.
I'm going to have a cigarette now, okay?
Yeah. Sure.
You mentioned the pub, that's a good idea.
Well, she's done the declining rate of profit, so I won't bother to. Historical issue completely sorted out. There's just one, just popping about. There's one thing. The issue of the working week, I think, is actually, is absolutely. This is the moment to raise it.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting pamphlet that's been produced by the New Economic Foundation called 121 Hours, where they point out that actually the number of, if you divide the number of paid hours by the number in our society by the number of people who are actually in employment, it works out about 21 and a half hours a week. So they say, well, perhaps this could be, our long-term goal. It's a sort of reasonable goal for the working week. That sounds all right by me, I must say. And of course, I can remember back in the 70s, Clive Jenkins producing a pamphlet where he was actually saying that in the early decades of the 21st century, we'd be on a 23-hour week. We're going to have this major problem of how does the working class deal with leisure. But it does seem to me that there are issues. Clearly, in a sense, we have to both develop tactics for defensive struggle and find ways of being on the offensive as well. And it seems to me that Liam has got a key point that it's actually on the ideological level, we can and should be being on the offensive and actually raising issues about the nature of work, about the idea that that pensions are actually deferred wages. They're not some sort of gift to be given to you, and so forth. That there are sort of quite fundamental things like that, which actually can absolutely strike a chord in people. And they say, yes, that makes sense to our lives. But it starts to actually undermine some of the basic assumptions that are pushed down people's throats that we absorb through our skins from the day we're born.
Great. That was them.
For the rest of the timeline. Right. Well, first to address Victoria Chick's point, although she has left and you will have to listen to me now on her behalf. Obviously, the idea of defying the treaties, debt or deed, standing against austerity, may lead to an exit from the Eurozone. But the exit is not a prerequisite to push for these. So you don't start by leaving, but you say that I'm not going to stay in the Eurozone and in the European Union at all costs. That is where the threat effect comes. And obviously, I have written elsewhere that we shouldn't underestimate the threat power of the peripheral countries, because if just Greece is pushed to leave or exits voluntarily, it will lead to such a chain reaction. It will be no good even for the core economies, and it won't be good for the German capitalists either. And they actually are very sober about the consequences and at one moment when the German ex-head of the German Chamber of Industrialists said that we have to have a different euro for the core countries and leave the euro as Germany, Netherlands, Austria and Finland, the German industrialists said, well, Mr. Henkel is not representing us, this is his personal view. This was a letter of Henkel in Financial Times, which was followed by the real industrialist position. So obviously, exit is obvious, it's a threat, and the threat is out on the table, but we don't start by saying we are leaving, but we are saying we are not going to accept your policies, no matter what the consequence is, and hopefully that will lead to a chain reaction, that's my point. Now, obviously, if the existing institutions of the European Union cannot be captured, no one says that Greece or Portugal or Ireland should stay in the Eurozone at all costs, and Euro is not a taboo. But the hope is that we will be able to capture those institutions if we were to follow a solid, united left European campaign. Now, there are two ways that this can be applied. One is the best case scenario where the German working class also wakes up to the call and says to Angela Merkel that they're not buying her policies. You see in France, Hollande is renegotiating the treaties. We're going further than that, and Hollande is just a social liberal. We want more renegotiation or reframing of the European Union than even what Hollande is saying. And that then will be, of course, reflected in further mobilizations that we just saw yesterday in Berlin, really. 1st of May was a big thing, and it was a shame that in Britain we don't even have a 1st of May proper with trade unions and all the rest of the movements. Now, the second scenario could be that, well, the wake-up call doesn't reach the German or French workers to the extent that we would wish for, but Spain and Portugal follows a call, and there is a Southern European Union, United Socialist Europe of all those countries living together. So many different things could happen, and of course the worst case scenario is that we are left with Mrs. Merkel. But don't underestimate politics even in Germany. That's just, I'm not going to read now the politics barometer, but most probably in the elections in Germany there would be a great coalition, and the Social Democrats are very clear that they're calling for ECB being the lender of last resort of the states, they're calling for Eurobonds, they're calling for a fiscal union. And Merkel knows that she will be in coalition with them. So she's, once she's signed, we are not going to renegotiate the treaty on the one hand, on the other hand she is building the road to a new growth pact as well. Because if she's in a great coalition next year, she will have to do some of the things Steinberg of the Social Democrats will tell her to do as the larger partner of the great coalition. So many things can change on the way. It's all open, which means then you have to play the game and be in the game, but define their rules. So that's my take on it. And, well, if it doesn't happen, exit follows, but if it's not a progressive mass exit with an alternative anti-capitalist bloc forming outside, it will be really greater pressure. Now, coming back to transition demands, when I started with the four, I was really thinking of minimum common denominator that unites the left. And this includes basic things, from austerity policies to public control of banking, to debt audit, to progressive taxation. That's my minimum. Obviously, when I say today an alternative fiscal, monetary and industrial policy aiming at full employment and ecological sustainability and equality, I mean the whole range of things that you have all brought up, and in the book on page 144, making quite a big deal out of shortening of working hours with wage compensation as a way of, one, reversing inequality, because this means the fall in profit share increases in labor's share, and second, as a way of creating more jobs without growth or with very low growth, because for ecological sustainability, I think we have to deal in the larger advanced capitalist countries with much lower growth rates. Since Fred is telling me that I should be stopping now, I'm not going to say much, but just refer to the chapter such that you buy the book. But in the book I'm also talking about a maximum income, top marginal tax rates reaching up to 100% about income, say about £100,000 a year or even less. And I'm talking about labor-intensive jobs in care industry and social services to reverse also gender inequality. And when it comes to things like nationalisation, I think I prefer the word socialisation, particularly since the industries are owned by multinationals and not by national corporations. Well, I started to use the phrase more rethinking ownership structures with participatory democracy, because socialization in its own right is also not clear. So I'm trying to talk, and this is what I said today, let's rethink ownership structures. And maybe not, we don't have to socialize the pubs, they can be self-employed, but obviously there are critical sectors which I list in the book, and 3 of them were named today. Well, pubs, I think, cafes, they're better when they're self-employed, small enterprises. But I'm all for, of course, energy, transport, housing, construction needs to be massive public enterprises, provided that they're socially accountable, transparent and participatory.
Thank you very much. So the strike next Thursday, demonstration from St Thomas's, and now next